We had last week representatives of many of the organisations who are trying to support borrowers in distress, and we asked them, of the 4 banks that we've seen this week, AIB, Ulster Bank, Berman TSB and yourselves, were there any in their collective experience that were stand out as playing hardball, as being very tough on borrowers relative to the others? And they said yes, Bank of Ireland. And I don't know what my colleagues in the committee feel, but based on the evidence I've heard so far, I can see why. In your numbers that you provided to the committee, you say as of the end of the year, there were 5,321 legal proceedings had been commenced. Can I ask, what is the total number of legal proceedings commenced by the bank? That figure obviously is as of the end of the year and applied only to the mortgages that were in arrears at a particular time. So there is a bigger figure, which is the total legal proceedings up to today, or let's say the end of Q1 of this year, applied to all mortgages. What is that figure?
I genuinely don't think there's a figure much bigger than that. That's all the default accounts that are in the legal process. I think what you're asking is, would we have people in early arrears or in the good book that would be in the legal process? And
or that have proceeded since the 1st of January of this year?
Yes, I'm sure there would be some that have proceeded since the 1st of January this year, but I don't have those numbers.
Is it in the hundreds or the thousands, would you say?
I certainly wouldn't expect it's in the thousands, Deputy, because you saw the movement between this return and the last return, and it wasn't in the thousands, so I don't suspect it'll be in the thousands. But I haven't got that number. We have to send that number to Central Bank by the end of April, and that's what we'll be working on.
Okay, thank you. You said you don't have the figures for the legal letters given. Now, the other banks did provide that. You were asked for it, and your response was you don't consider that to be a long-term solution. It would have been more helpful to give us the figure we asked for and caveat that figure by saying, by the way, we don't deem this to be a long-term solution. But if we, no, I'll continue. If we look broadly at the other banks and the letters initiating legal proceedings or threatening legal proceedings relative to your own, it would not be unreasonable to come up with a figure of about 4,000 to 5,000. If that's true, it means that the total number of legal proceedings and letters threatening legal proceedings is up around 8,700. Now, you said you don't have any estimate for the number of repossessions Bank of Ireland is likely to end up with. I'm very surprised to hear that anyone who's involved in sending out thousands upon thousands and initiating thousands upon thousands of legal proceedings that ultimately end up in possession, that you haven't got an estimate. But be that as it may, if we assume that 1 in 5 of the legal proceedings end up in repossession, a reasonably conservative estimate, I'd say, we'd be looking at a total repossession figure of in and around 1,700. Does that jar significantly with what you are expecting?
1 in 5 would sound a little bit high.
What would you say, Mr. Boucher, would be?
You've asked the question. I don't have an estimate below that, but you've asked for a gut feel, Deputy, because I don't have figures, and we have to be very careful if we give figures that they have a verification or a degree of accuracy. But you did ask, you suggested 1 in 5. I'm giving you a gut feel reaction. 1 in 5 sounds a bit high.
Feels high. Thank you, Mr. Boucher.
Can I answer the question? Because that's all based on the premise that there's 4,000 letters out there that we haven't put on this return. I mean, there quite simply is not 4,000 letters out there that we've not put on this return. So the whole basis of it, and just to be clear, because we wanted to give the committee every piece of information that was looked for, there had been some suggestion previously that some people issuing warning of legal letters would count them as proposed solutions. We didn't do that, and that's what we read into that. We were submitting to you what we submitted to the Central Bank as our marked return, and anything in terms of our non-cooperation strategy would not qualify for marked and was not included on this return. It was not in any way to withhold information from the committee, and we will provide the information you're now looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Manson. If we just take legal proceedings, let's just take the numbers you've given. That's 5,321. Now, if we assume that a 1 in 5 figure on legal proceedings, and not including the threatening letters we're talking about, just on proceedings that have already been initiated, if we assume that 1 in 5 of them end up in repossession, we're still at a figure of well in excess of 1,000 repossessions. Would that figure jar with your sense of what's going to happen over the next few months and years, Mr. Boucher?
I can't say exactly, but if I look at, we have a similar size mortgage business. In fact, our mortgage business in the UK is just slightly bigger. We have about 600 repossessions a year in the UK.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, your figures, when you look at the number of legal proceedings initiated relative to the number of mortgages we're talking about, Bank of Ireland has initiated twice the level of legal proceedings that any of the other three banks have. Can you explain why that's the case?
Deputy, that figure does not bear any comparison that I've seen. When the central bank issued figures in September based on their March returns, they suggested that 55% of the forbearance, 55% of cases across the banks were legal and 45% for forbearance. That was a combination of buy-to-let and PDH cases, and our figures were exactly the same. So I can't comment on what you've just said because I'm not aware of it.
So let's take Bank of Ireland versus AIB. Let's just take the PDHs. There's about 11,000 mortgages involved, and you've initiated about 3,500 legal proceedings against those 11,000. Bank of Ireland, it's about 25,000 mortgages involved, and they've initiated about 2,800. So they have over twice the number of mortgages under consideration that you have, and they've initiated less than half the legal proceedings that you have. So that's a multiplier well in excess of 2.
And I think, Deputy, if memory serves me right, they told the committee yesterday that they've instigated a significant number in the first quarter of this year.
So you'd expect the AIB figures to come up?
I'm not commenting on what AIB figures will go to, just what they told the committee.
Well, Ulster Bank did not say that to the committee. They have slightly more mortgages than the AIB. Yeah, I understand. I'm moving on to Ulster Bank. Ulster Bank have 14,000 mortgages compared to your 11,000, and they've initiated about 1,700 relative to your 3,500. So again, there's a figure well in excess of twice in terms of legal proceedings initiated relative to the number of mortgages that are being considered.
And I think, Deputy, as you said, I really can't comment on other banks. I don't know how they run their collections operations. We've tried to explain in terms of our own bank that we're able to offer forbearances for 9 out of 10 customers that engage with us. If customers don't engage with us, we move on to the legal process. Most of the numbers that you've quoted are at the early stage of the legal process, the demand for possession stage. And if they engage, we would hope that lots of those cases will end up in forbearance rather than in advanced legal.
If we go on your figures, this 9 out of 10 people offered sustainable solutions. The figures you've provided just on PDH, if we just take legal proceedings and assisted voluntary sale, they account for over 60% of all of the mortgages. How can you have offered 9 out of 10 mortgage holders long-term solutions if over 60% of the mortgages we are considering, either the borrowers have agreed for whatever reason to sell the house, or they are now facing legal proceedings from the bank?
Again, Deputy, it's different populations. What we're looking at here are customers still in default at the 30th of September. Lots of customers that we've offered forbearance to would have been in default, and the forbearance would have sorted out the issues that they've had and moved them back into the good book. So this is not, unfortunately, the way the figures are presented doesn't tell the full story, because this is a point in time, and ultimately what you're going to be left with in terms of default are the customers that the more of them will be in the legal process, because forbearance should be curing customers and taking them out of default. So the figures that I'm giving you are of customers who completed SFSs, well in excess of 10,000 of them, that completed SFSs with us across the year. And what we're telling you of those customers, some of them were pre-arrears, some of them were early arrears, some of them were late arrears, that we were able, where they had difficulties or where they expected they were going to have difficulties, we were able to offer forbearance in 9 out of 10 cases.
Thank you. Can I ask, when we met 6 months ago, the members of the committee expressed a number of views on a number of approaches being taken by Bank of Ireland, just as they are today. Did the bank make any changes to its resolution processes, offers, or anything else based on what you heard from the committee members 6 months ago?
Well, on an ongoing basis, we look at how we improve. We never think that we're in a perfect state. We have to continue to enhance our processes, our procedures. We look at advice from a range of parties, so it's hard for us to say exactly what. There's a combination of our view of what's working where we have to improve, where we don't have to improve. I can't say there's some specific point, but it may be that a point was made which was something that has been under consideration. So I can't say exactly that point to that point, Deputy. But what I do say is on an ongoing basis, as with all of our other businesses, we have to look to ways to continue to improve our processes.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to write-downs. I'm slightly confused. My understanding is the bank's unambiguous position is there will never be any write-down by the bank outside of, let's say, a bankruptcy on secured debt. That's correct?
That's our policy, yes.
Is that also the case for unsecured debt?
We've said for unsecured debt that, for example, in the answer to the question from Deputy Humphreys, the bank was a mover to say that unsecured debt is a significant issue. If the banks agreed a protocol amongst each other that if Bank of Ireland had a credit card and it was an Ulster Bank mortgage customer, we would agree and reciprocation would apply and vice versa. So yes, we do take write-downs on unsecured debt. That's the nature of lending. Secured debt, unsecured is by its nature lower down in the waterfall.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Boucher. So can I give you an, let's say we have a borrower who has an unsustainable portfolio of debt with Bank of Ireland. They've got a mortgage and let's say they've got a credit card. Is it the case that Bank of Ireland might enter into an arrangement with them which writes down the credit card debt but doesn't write down the mortgage debt? Okay, thank you.
If you beg your pardon, Deputy, I mean, that would be something we would be quite keen on, to deal with the unsecured, where the repayment patterns are high and the interest rates are much higher. So we try and right-size the unsecured first, and then we look at the secured.
So it is possible the bank might say, look, you owe us 10,000 on the credit card. Here is a solution. We're going to continue with the mortgage as it is, but we're going to write down your 10,000 on the credit card to 2,000.
Yes, Deputy.
2,000 would sound quite a lot, but certainly a write-down.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Am I right in thinking then that any PIA proposed that had any write-down of mortgage debt in it would be and is vetoed by Bank of Ireland?
I can't say any, but it would not be our policy. There'd have to be some very extreme circumstances.
Then on a voluntary sale, for example, where there is residual debt, does Bank of Ireland consider that to have been secured and therefore it will not be written down, or is that now deemed unsecured and might be written down?
We would consider it just being part of the secured.
Okay, so let me just...
The basis under which we provided the loan was it was a secured mortgage over 25 years at a relatively low interest rate.
Okay, so let's take an example. Let's say somebody has a house worth 200,000. They owe Bank of Ireland 300,000. There is an assisted voluntary sale, so there is a residual debt of 100,000 euro. That is clearly unsecured debt because there's no asset against that debt. In that case, am I right in thinking that Bank of Ireland will not write down that unsecured debt under any circumstances that don't involve, say, bankruptcy?
A mortgage is provided to an individual. A component of the security is the property.
I appreciate that, but after the sale, obviously,
that's the way we look at it.
There is no security. So Bank of Ireland, when it looks at residual debt, which is by definition unsecured debt, and would have to be carried on your accounts as unsecured debt, you will not write any of that unsecured debt down. Is that correct?
We take into consideration the basis that the loan was originated, the purpose of the loan and the nature of that loan and the security that attached to that loan.
And is the corollary of that, Mr. Boucher, that you will not write down that unsecured debt?
We follow through.
The auditors are forced to provide in full.
Sorry, Mr. Boucher. Please. Mr. Boucher, can you what does we follow through mean? Does it mean you will not write that debt down?
That's correct. If it's a mortgage, if it's a credit card, we might look at it differently because the mortgage was provided on the basis that a secured asset.
Can I ask, what percentage interest would Bank of Ireland apply to this 100,000 unsecured debt?
It's the prevailing rate of interest on the mortgage.
Rich. Okay. Thank you. Just 1 minute, Deputy. Thanks, Chair. You obviously do have a responsibility to your shareholders. If Bank of Ireland customers began to withdraw their deposits on the stated reason that Bank of Ireland was playing hardball in a way that none of the other banks appear to be, would that potentially change the bank's policy as regard to this residual unsecured debt in assisted voluntary sales?
In our experience, depositors are influenced by the security of their deposit and the interest rates they pay.
I appreciate that. Can you answer the question that I asked you?
A bank that is strongly capitalised is likely to attract deposits.
I appreciate that. I agree with that. But could you answer the question that I asked you?
I doubt it.
I beg your pardon?
I doubt it.
You doubt it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Final question then is just on split mortgage. Very quick technical questions. What interest does Bank of Ireland currently charge on the shell portion of a split mortgage?
Again, it goes with the original contract, so if the customer was on a tracker rate or a variable rate, that's what will be paid on the warehoused portion as well.
But I think we capped based on a suggestion the chairman made to me last time. I said I would think about it. When we say we think about something, that means we do. We take it seriously. If we say we can't do something, that's what we say. We recognised that there was a concern. We felt that the vast majority of our defaulting customers are on trackers. We felt that there was a perception that we were seeking to make a profit. So what we did was we said that for the period that the warehouse would be, for 3 years, subject to review, it would be the cost of 3-year unsecured money to the bank at that time. That was transparent because we issued a bond in the market, and I think that was, I can't remember exactly, I think it was 2.5 to 2.6%, somewhere in that territory, Deputy.
So I'm thinking that if I am a tracker customer and I'm paying, let's say, 2%, that you will shelve a portion of my mortgage and charge me the same interest rate on the shelved portion as on the portion that I'm paying.
The tracker rate follows through to the warehouse.
Okay, so there's no reduction on interest rate on the shelved portion?
No.
And therefore the total payment commitments don't fall in any way, they're simply deferred?
The cash flow, the primary purpose is to match try to match the cash on a month-to-month, year-to-year basis with the cash flow of the customer.
Okay, I'll finish on this, Chair. You see, I think, Mr. Mason, what you said earlier on was when somebody asked why Bank of Ireland has 81 split mortgages versus, say, permanent TSB with 3,955, you said, well, the split mortgage isn't affordable for many of our customers. If you take someone's mortgage at 2%, 2.25%, split the two pieces of capital in half and charge the same interest on the two of them, there is absolutely no financial change for that customer. So can I suggest that the reason it is unaffordable is because your split mortgage is completely meaningless?
No, the split mortgage is fully consistent with the split mortgage that was that was recommended in the Keane report. And what happens is the interest is charged on both sides, but the customer only pays capital and interest on one side. So the level of payment they make on a monthly basis reduces.
In the short term, but the full amount of capital accruing the full amount of interest.
Reduces for the life of the mortgage, and there's a warehoused amount that needs to be dealt with at the end.
Is there a variation on with the variable interest rate? Mr. Boucher referred to tracker mortgages, that there is a set rate, but if and I know
we capped, after the suggestion of the committee, I said I'd go back and consult with my colleague and think about it, and we capped it to the 3-year cost of money to the bank at that time, 3-year unsecured. I'm sorry, Chairman, I don't have the exact.
It is 2.5%.
It's
2.5 and the variable.
Yes.
Okay. All right.